Hey folks, Jeff Salzman here, and welcome to the Daily Evolver. Tonight, I am joined by my dear friend and colleague, Diane Musho Hamilton, with whom I have been plowing the integral fields for many years, seminars, many books, conferences, meetings, and from whom I have learned so much, particularly about the spiritual path and the spiritual path of relationship. And that's some of your lines of genius, Di, you know. So anyway, if you don't know, Diane Musho Hamilton is, in addition to being a core integral teacher, is a Zen sensei. She is a Zen teacher with the sanga 2 Arrows Zen, which operates out of an urban Zendo in Salt Lake City and a brand spanking new mountain Zendo in the wilds of southern Utah.
That's right.
She is the author of The Zen of You and Me. And welcome, Sister Di. How are you, dear?
Thank you,
Good to have you with us.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me on the show. Congratulations on the Daily Evolver. I know people really, really appreciate the trouble you take to get online and give us integral interpretations of world events. It's so helpful.
Yeah, and also to spotlight people who are doing the same.
Yeah.
And you are. I mean, you're really one of the pioneers of integral, and in the integration of integral with contemplative, is particularly Zen. And, you know, so as integralists, you and I both think and feel that things are evolving. That's the whole point. And that new stages of basically everything are coming online all the time. And this includes spiritual practice. And I know you've thought a lot about this. And the reason I know you've thought a lot about this is that today I saw an email you sent out, or your organization did, about a program you're doing called the Future of Zen, the Future of Zen Practice, exploring the encounter of tradition and innovation.
Yes.
And I really want to know your latest thinking on this. And so I called it, asked you if you'd be on, and we worked it out tonight. So here we are. And so let's just start there. I mean, you know, practice has changed through history. We can see how all of that is. And, you know, something new is happening and the old forms are falling away. And, you know, what do we make of it?
Well, I would like to reiterate what you said. I mean, when I was very deeply involved in Zen study and practice with my teacher, and, you know, for whatever reason, Buddhist meditation has kind of scratches the existential itch for me, in terms of, you know, we always say in the Buddhist tradition that until you narrow the gap, and you really learn how to become one with things, you know, not about things, but as one, that the itch doesn't get scratched. So I really discovered through meditation that was true for me, that I felt like I was able to kind of dissolve the experience of separation and really become one with my whole life. And I didn't have any particular ambition about it. In fact, my teacher brought me in at one point into a conversation and asked me if I had any ambitions to teach, and I said no. And he said, well, you should start thinking about others. So that was interesting. But shortly thereafter, we got introduced to Ken, and my teacher, Genpo Roshi, went to Boulder or Denver and met with
We're
Ken.
talking Ken Wilber, of course, integral philosopher. Yes.
That's right. And Ken got very interested in his method. You know, he connected to it and he dived right in. And so then he invited Ken and myself to a series of events. And that's when you and I met. And I think we're always trying to think, was it 2003 or 4?
It was the end of 2003. And there was a lot of cool people there. You know, this was when Ken was really coming out.
Yes.
And this was really my first integral event. And it might have been yours as well.
Absolutely was the first. And it was
it was at Ken's house. And Genpo was your teacher, and he was teaching Big Mind, which Ken was really enamored of, and we all were.
Yeah, he loved it.
And the reason is because it reliably transmits a non-dual state
Yeah.
reliably, predictably within about an hour.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It gives people a taste, And if they've been practicing more, sometimes they actually have quite an opening during the process. So,
Yeah.
I mean, Big Mind itself was an innovation
And an integration.
To
Yes.
use, Jungian part theory, and to have that come down through Helen Sidra Stone, and then to use their facilitative method to ask the questions that Zen study and practice. So the very experience of the Big Mind was one of a kind of an innovation of a skillful means that was useful to our time.
Right.
So of course for some people it's controversial, because within any tradition, whether it's music or science or whatever it is, there's always, as Ken's pointed out, there's always a preserving function, and there's always the creative advance into novelty. And he loves to quote that. Is it Alfie Whitehead? To have a university.
Alfred Whitehead, the
Yeah.
creative advance into novelty. That's just built into the fabric of the cosmos.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So the cosmos both preserves and it innovates. And as Ken likes to say, when something endures in all four quadrants and gets traction in all four quadrants, it will be preserved. And yet if things don't grow and change, they ossify, and they cease to be as, what's the word? They cease to be as meaningful, you might say. So I think it's been one of Ken Wilber's big concerns, is that the mythic meme traditions as we know them, and Zen is included in this, evolved, somewhere 3,000 to 5,000 years ago, and maybe 10 if you look at Judaism or Hinduism, but that, all of the insights of modernism, having to do with brain science or, just our basic understanding of the physical world and all that empiricism has brought to bear. And then the postmodern insights, those that really seek to create equity between the genders, or to certainly understand and create a place for people who have, same-sex orientations, and to maybe rectify ourselves to the kind of awful history of the world, and to not take empiricism quite so literally, and to find a place for interpretation. So in other words, culture has evolved a lot, and there's some very meaningful things that have happened since the traditions were established. And it's really Ken's, proposition that unless the traditions learn how to integrate some of that, they just simply aren't as useful. And there's many, many examples of why that's true. So he's sort of insisted that anybody worth their salt who's in a spiritual tradition should be looking through an evolutionary, and not only an evolutionary lens, but also a human development lens, because there's so much about adult human development that's left out of how we do spiritual practice. So he's been a tremendous advocate for asking us to start to look at some of these things and seeing if there's a way to bring them to bear.
Well, and Zen is actually well positioned for this in a way, because Zen is an experience. It's a realization. There's not a lot of dogma. In fact, you're kind of allergic to dogma. And so you could just work with it and actually see, so what does move the ball? What's next? And so for our listeners, and this is the integral ghetto, right?
Yeah, right.
So, we've done it all. We've kissed all the frogs. And a lot of us have done a lot of meditation. What is actually next in contemplative or sort of a new integral spiritual path?
Well, I really think that, the formulation that we've made around waking up and growing up, and you might say showing up, and then we also talk about cleaning up, is one way we could talk about it, where the support of any spiritual practice is really concerned with shifting identification from the local identity and the constricted identity and the limited identity of Diane and of Jeff, and helping us become identified with all things. And so certainly Zazen is really about that. It's about, you might say, the sense of self just becoming more porous, more transparent, in some for some people, just radical shifts. I mean, you see those kinds of radical shifts in someone like Eckhart Tolle or Byron Katie, or certainly the long history of Zen masters who've had very big openings.
Right.
There's also a version of that, of just the people who practice continuously but don't have necessarily a radical opening, but just gradually over time become less defensive, less egoically oriented, and much more willing to identify with others and with life itself.
Right.
And so whether it happens gradually or suddenly, whether it's a glimpse or whether it's a radical transformation, the practice works, and that's why it's still here. So that takes care of the waking up part. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, we can see that, one of the integrations that has already gone on between, you already talked about it, was Big Mind.
Right.
So Big Mind is an integration of Buddhist contemplation with voice dialogue therapy, where we're looking at subpersonalities and we're speaking from subpersonalities and we're doing it as a group. And there is it's a new thing.
Yeah.
That neither of them had been brought together. And you and I both spent a good bit of time at Naropa, you back in the days of Trumpa.
Yes, that's right. A long time ago.
I'm just so jealous. But at any rate, we've done Naropa. And of course, Naropa is a great example of encounter of Western psychology and Eastern spirituality.
Right.
So that alone already is moving us into some new territory.
Totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And one sort of helps to speed up the other in a way. I mean, they support each other, with a good teacher.
Yeah. And there's some good writing out there about that. I think Mark Epstein has done some really good work around that. There's, I think, another writer, I believe his name's Jeffrey Hopkins, who's written about that. And so there's some good books talking about the confluence of Buddhism and also psychotherapy and psychology. And I think that Buddhist psychologists rank pretty well among the better psychologists, just because they know simply
totally. I mean, my goodness. I mean, think of how contemplation helps us to do, our typical psychological processes.
Yes, that's
my
right.
Goodness.
Well, we become great observers of what's actually happening in the mind.
Yes. Yeah. So that's one way. And then, another way that I think of when I think of you particularly is the we space waking up.
Yeah.
This new thing where it's not about going off into the cave, but you actually have to have human contact with other people.
Well, it's so funny. It's that funny thing where people say, I love humanity. It's the people I don't like.
Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, exactly. And we say in our Buddhist practice, we say we love the sanga. It's just the people that drive us crazy. and interestingly enough, there's the kind of instructions, you might say, from this mythic meme level of development, because as we know, our worldviews change and what becomes important shifts and changes. But basically, the precepts, I mean, all the great traditions have the commandments or the precepts or the codes of conduct or the ethical guidelines that we need to use. But what we've also found is that in the postmodern era, that some of the, you might say, another iteration of those skill sets have really come forward. So let's just look at simple listening skills. Thich Nhat Hanh talks a lot about the importance of deep listening. And I know in my work as a mediator, listening is everything. So if we can learn how to listen to each other, that has tremendous impact. As we become more trusting and learning how to kind of deal with conflict, we can actually be more authentic with people. There's a place for our emotions as a source of information and energy. And this skill set is just simply not covered in the precepts. The precepts say don't talk badly about people. Well, that's right. But what happens when you have to have a conversation and you're mad?
Right.
So in a certain way, we're growing our capacity to work in relationship. And I think some of the research that's been done on particularly on men's happiness points to emotional development, relational development, which leads to altruism. So in my mind, when you talk about what's next is actually a genuine practice of sanga, not just one in which we sit in a talking circle and hear each other, although that's a nice breakthrough too, but where we actually practice our relationship skills and become more real, more authentic, more energized, and more honest with each other.
Wow.
Yeah,
So that's what you're working with your people.
absolutely.
And
Because
how's that going?
I think it's going great. I mean, it's a challenge in the sense that, we avoid conflict because we don't want to hurt people's feelings. We accommodate too much because we all know how to accommodate. And when we do finally decide to speak, we haven't clarified it very much. So it comes out in often rather competitive or aggressive terms. So until people have the chance to actually work with those in a real way, you don't see a lot of progress. But I think I really feel confident the people I'm working with are having a different experience than they've had before. And it's a little bit of a bottom line in my sanga. It's like you have
Yeah.
to be
Well,
willing.
I've taught a lot with you.
I know you have. Yeah, we've taught
And
together.
oh my God, the places you would take these poor people.
I know. I know it.
I mean,
What are some of them? Do you remember some of
well,
them?
that you would just be fearless. I mean, that you had some capacity to accommodate and metabolize and somehow even be friendly with
Yeah.
all of the stuff
Mhm.
that inevitably arises when people are talking about real shit.
Yeah, exactly.
We can have pseudo-community
Yeah,
till we're blue in the face. But
right.
if we want to move beyond that, we're going to get into some territory that most of us don't know anything about and want to
Right.
get the hell out of here.
Yeah, that's right. It starts to
But
feel
not
like
you.
you're walking into a, yeah. Well, I've done it so much that I kind of know the territory. I kind of know how to get through
I
it.
think it's because you were the rodeo queen.
I do.
I think it's just the echo of that. But at any rate, so you're really working with this authenticity in terms of showing up with each other
Mhm.
and doing it in a
Growing up emotionally. We have to grow up. We can't just keep acting like kids, and toddlers and have no emotional sophistication, not know how to deal with our mind states, just sit on the cushion and everything's fine. And as soon as we get off, we go right back to all the old patterns, So I
Oh
think
my God.
in our teaching relationship, yours and mine and Terry's, we've done a lot of this kind of work together.
Yeah.
You
I've watched you do it. I mean,
You've done it too. You've ventured in. You've been
yeah,
wild.
I do
You
my
said
thing.
things. You
I
say
do my thing.
things.
Yeah.
You take risks. It's great.
Yeah, no, it's actually been very helpful for me, and
Mhm.
it goes against my grain, but I'm grateful for it.
Mhm.
And so to see that, and I do see it already. I mean, I
Mhm.
see this as a spiritual practice. Anytime that we can sort of metabolize, get a witness view of C instead of B, our
Mhm.
patterns.
Yes.
That's spirit. That is, the definition of spiritual growth.
Yeah,
And
totally.
to do that with other people is, just another version of that. It's not also particularly totally new. I mean, we've had monasteries and we've had, spiritual groups for time immemorial.
But
But
mostly we made people sit still and be quiet.
it's true. They sat in rows.
Just, just wash floors
Not a
and be
lot of
quiet.
real, communication. No, it's true.
Stick to the
So
schedule.
yeah. So that leads me to, this sort of, you know, what- you know, if we think about Zen is a amber
Structure.
product. Yeah, it's a structure. So it's a very hierarchical, and there's all these layers and levels. And you and I have both lived through a cultural change where we had to kiss the ass of our teachers. Now our students don't kiss our asses. And I
What
just think that
happened?
is completely unfair.
I do too. I think it's just, but it's totally true. We got caught right in that
Yeah,
that
sour spot.
transition. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So, so, we actually, one of the things that I think is true about Integral is that we actually take spirituality seriously. I
Mhm.
mean, we really want this to be transformational. We want to have our minds blown about it. This is not just about dancing in the woods. It's, all of that could be part of it and so forth. But we really want to blow ourselves up here.
Yes.
And we have to have some still transmission of authority.
Well,
and
transmission, yeah.
and submission, right? Or what's tell me about that. How you working that out?
Well, I think it's one of the diciest territories in spiritual practice. I mean, certainly, as you said, we've inherited in the Zen tradition quite a strict hierarchy in terms of who the spiritual teacher is and who the student is, and what the framework for that relationship is, what the agreement is. And at the same time, in the States, you've got all these spiritual seekers who have been schooled to have their own opinions, who have been taught to be creative and to be really
Expressive.
self-responsibility and expressive, and then all of a sudden they come back into what can be actually quite a large developmental step backwards. And so I think the important point is we really clarify, it's if you want to learn to play piano, you go to somebody who's better than you are. The same is true with spiritual practice. Someone who has much more experience, maybe they've had some openings, maybe they really understand some of the heart of the teaching. But that doesn't mean, I think, the kind of old disciplines where you just sort of give your entire life up to the preferences of the teacher and to the inside of the teacher. I believe that that's really changing. I know it's certainly changed in my practice, partly because I don't want that level of responsibility. I think it can backfire into a kind of infantilization where people are so used to orienting toward the teacher and around the teacher that they become irresponsible in a way. You and I have been talking about Wild Country, the special on Bhagwan
Documentary
Rajneesh.
on Netflix about the community of Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. It is heightened like the 80s or whatever it was.
I think it was in the 90s.
90s, okay.
Well, maybe it was in the 80s.
So a 6-part documentary that's astonishing.
It kind of tracks the 4 years of Bhagwan Rajneesh and his followers moving from India up to Oregon and then proceeding to create just a terrible situation with the local government and the state government and finally the feds. And basically, it's quite a show of what can go wrong with a guru yoga style practice.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a woman in that who's just frightening to me. I mean, she's just frightening. Her whole sense is that she's extremely devoted to the guru and whatever the guru wants. And so at some point, they think some doctor is, threatening to the guru. So they decide they're going to poison him. And she just raised her hand and said, I'll do it. I mean, that's a very, very shadowy outcome of that kind of guru yoga, where you have people whose personality structures really just go astray by not being held to some level of self-responsibility. So I think both from a typology perspective and from a developmental perspective, there's all kinds of problems there.
Yeah, and let's not overly, romanticize that stage of development, because we see it in terms of the Catholic priest scandals. We see it in terms of, Bhagwan, and no end actually.
Well, and how many friends do we have who are
these absolute people, these guys with absolute power?
That's
and
right.
Women.
And people, all friends of ours who were raised in institutions like the Catholic Church or the Mormon Church that felt so fundamentally oppressed that it's taken them years to get over it and kind of reclaim their lives, and that they're filled with a kind of wounding or a resentment. So these dilemmas are serious. They're real. Yeah. And they deserve to be questioned and lived thoroughly. So I'm really trying to clarify that with my own students.
Yeah.
I'm here to elucidate the Buddha Dharma. I'm also here to transmit a state of mind that is open, available, that's non-conceptual, that's immediate in the here and now, that is unconditioned. Hopefully, my students have some experience of that direct taste, but they have to also remain tremendously self-responsible. I mean, I'm not a guru. I don't even think of myself as a master. I think of myself as a teacher who's spent a lot of years in the tradition, and I can, give some guidance. But
you can also cut their heads off, can't you? I've seen you do that occasionally. I've heard stories too.
Really?
Well, yeah. I mean,
remind me.
No, well, just so there you are. You're a teacher, okay?
Yeah.
You're not a guru, okay? Let's say you're a capital T teacher.
Okay.
you're going to have some authority.
Yeah.
And so you're going to give yourself some room to tell somebody something that they don't want to hear in a way that's going to, metaphorically cut their head off. I mean,
Well, I mean, I
you're
just did
just
it
going to
this weekend.
disabuse them of a fantasy about themselves or the world. And
I just did it this weekend, and it was
okay,
painful. It was painful for me, and it was painful for the student. But this is a woman that I've been working with for about 5 or 6 years, and she's a very diligent practitioner, does lots of meditation. But when push comes to shove, she just has really profoundly negative interpretations of what's happening and tends to blame others a lot for her mind state. And I told her that I really thought she needed to do some therapeutic work, that I asked her to leave the practice. And when she's done that therapeutic work, she can come back in. And she was not happy about it. But I just basically had to say, listen, this is not addressing what you need to address. And I feel like it's my obligation to do that.
yeah,
I can't
it
just
is.
allow someone
It
to
is your
hang out.
obligation to do that.
It's my obligation.
Yeah.
So
That's the piece
she's
about,
mad.
yeah.
Well,
that's the piece about, if you are going to actually create a group, a sangha, there actually does have to be a boundary of what's in and what's out.
Yes.
And there actually has to be somebody who is the ultimate judge of what's in and what's out, and who does realize that that's an obligation that they have to step up to, even when it's painful.
I seem a little more willing to do that than a lot of people, but I do check with my students, and I get feedback and talk about it a little bit, because I mean, when someone's practiced for 5 or 6 years, you don't just want to throw them out of the practice when they have friends and they have connections and it means something. On the other hand, to let someone just completely stay stuck is not very responsible in my mind.
Well, see, just what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
So you checked it out with others in the sangha.
Mm-hmm.
And you got feedback from others in the sangha.
I did.
I can't imagine the Tibetan teachers that I sat at the feet of for all those years ever doing anything like that.
Yeah.
But it was just not. That was not part of that earlier form.
Yeah.
Where you're getting feedback because you don't want to show that you have any doubt. In a way.
Right. Yeah, I do get a lot of feedback that because we talk about waking up, so that is seeing our identity beyond this small self, growing up, which is actually expanding and working with our emotions, with our relational development, with, our altruism. And then cleaning up, we refer to as shadow work, which is that you cannot be in a position of power and not be blind to certain kinds of dynamics. The very fact of being in a position of power creates those blind spots. So unless you're willing to work on those blind spots and try to see some of what other people are telling you you're seeing, that can become very dangerous too, as we know.
So you're not only helping your students deal with their shadow, you're dealing with your own?
Doing my best in front of everybody.
God, in front of everybody. Diane.
I know.
Well, that's the difference between somebody who could do what you do and look what you're doing. I mean, it's really magnetizing people in a beautiful way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying. I just try to do what we do in psychology, where we express vulnerability.
See, this is a new form, honey. This, yes, don't you think? I mean,
think so.
It's nothing like the amber traditional form. It's not even like the modern form or postmodern form. It's sort of an integration of the best of all of them in a way. There is an authority. There is a sense of community and doing it together. There is a sense of form. And that's what I also wanted to point out, that having gone to one of your retreats, I so appreciate how impeccably you have us work with the form that is just, thousands of years old.
Well, the Japanese forms, one of the things in Buddhism in America certainly is that the Vipassana people have gotten rid of all the Indian forms, and they've basically Americanized everything. And the Tibetan Buddhists and also the Japanese Buddhists have not, so we still work with the Japanese forms, although we work with them. They look beautiful to an American or a Canadian, but they don't look so beautiful to the Japanese. They say watching us do the forms is like
Oh, I
if
know.
they were to walk around in cowboy hats, you know.
Oh, I know. No,
And it's true. I was just at a Soto Zen Buddhist Association meeting in the Bay Area, and I got up early to go sit, and I just wasn't thinking very much. And I went into the Zendo, and everybody was wearing their robes except me, and I had like on a hoodie. I wandered in there. I looked like I worked for Silicon Valley, you know, with my hair and my hoodie, and
Yeah.
they looked so beautiful. They were so impeccable. They were
Oh, I know.
yeah. So
No,
I'm not so great at it, honestly.
well, you're great enough in that, you know, as a contemporary American, it feels really good to rest in those forms and to move
They're
with the
beautiful.
group and to walk slow
Mm-hmm.
and to follow the person in front of me and to listen to the bell ring
Mm-hmm.
and to watch somebody take on vows and become move up the ladder of the
Mm-hmm.
hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful.
Yeah,
You know,
that's
we
right.
don't want to get rid of that.
No, we don't. We
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah.
We might want to soften it and change it. And for us, you know, just the absolute utter detail of the Japanese forms I haven't studied them enough for it to be there. But you know, we do some stuff.
This is the American version.
And you know, I mean, there's always a big conversation within teachers within certainly the Zen community about this. I have a little bit of a bone to pick just because there seems to be a lot of voice given to the importance of preservation. People want to preserve the tradition. They want it to be passed down as is. And
Mm-hmm.
I tend to represent the voice of innovation,
Mm-hmm.
which is that it's not simply that we want to change, it's that evolution is changing us, and America is changing us, and the West is changing us. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a certain amount of just yielding to those forces and seeing what works and what endures. So I'm a little more on that side of the street, which means I'm seen a little bit by some people as a charlatan, I think.
Really?
A little
Well,
bit.
you're talking about the group of Zen teachers, associates, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask you just a bit about that. So there's an association of Zen teachers. There's
There's several. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're in the white plum lineage,
Mm-hmm.
and that's one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And is there a national Zen? I mean, how's Zen doing? I mean, is it growing? Is it not? Is it splintering apart? I mean, what's going on with the sort of national?
Well, there are a number of different associations. So there's the Association of Soto Zen Buddhists in America, I believe. And that's actually connected to the Soto school in Japan. And then there is the Soto Zen Buddhist Association, which are mainly the American teachers who relatively Japanese influenced and quite monastic. And then you have the White Plum, which is the Maizumi Roshi, who was my Dharma grandfather, Genpo Roshi's teacher. And he had transmission in 3 different traditions. So he's Rinzai, he's Soto, and he's also something called Sambo Kyodan. So they're a little bit more of a hybridization, and that's their association. I belong to that. And then there's the lay American Zen Buddhist Association, which are for all American Zen teachers, not just Soto teachers. And then there's the Lay American Zen Teachers Association. So that's another one, which I'm not a part of, but I could belong to either one of those. And then you have the whole Rinzai school, and then you have the Koreans. So there's a lot of Zen going on. I mean, compared to, it's a relatively rigorous form of spiritual practice. So you don't find like huge numbers of people flocking to it. I mean, the Christian megachurches are massively bigger. The Muslims are massively bigger. Buddhism has always been a relatively small number compared to the rest. You know?
Yeah, I remember seeing the Pew studies that I forget the
Yeah.
percentage. It was small, but the thing that was so interesting to me was it just never changed.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean,
just kind of
3% or 5% or for whatever.
Yeah.
It's sort of a standard kind of thing. And I haven't looked in the last few years, but
yeah, it's not a big number of people.
Yeah.
I mean,
But-
the practice is rigorous. You know, learning how to do zazen and really sit is challenging. That's what
oh, it's boring. I mean,
it
you know, I
can
just
be.
look at my eyelids. No, I'm just kidding. Um, let's broaden it even more here
Okay,
as we close.
let's go
Um,
even broader.
yeah, so you're talking about the future of Zen practice and of course contemplative practice.
Hmm.
And let's think in terms of just integral practice, where we're,
Okay.
drawing from the West, and we're bringing this sort of personal God and love and,
Hmm.
and we're even going into nature mysticism where we are dancing in the woods and we're talking to the trees. And I
Yeah.
know you do all of these things.
Yeah.
And,
Sure.
you know, and your students do too, right? I mean,
Well, I mean, let's just use integral for a minute. So if we look at the quadrants, right? We do a lot of upper left contemplation. We do a lot of practice of ethics and communication skills. We also do,
that's a
developing
lower left.
and developing our sets of values and how we engage and what the Bodhisattva vow, those things. And then our structures, some of the structures are changing. They're not quite as rigorous, you might say. We let people of different genders come in. People of different religious persuasions are entered. That's not necessarily typical of a mythic meme thing.
Nope, not at
But,
all.
all four quadrants are online, and we can look at the quadrants and we look at levels. We're trying to enact an integral level of development that it contains more complexity, both, you might say the healthy element of each level. Lines of development, someone who is, let's say, really service oriented, just has a natural inclination to service. They're probably going to do really well in a Zen center. But if they don't get challenged in other lines of development, that could be problematic for them. Like maybe their meditation line, or maybe they need to learn how to do business better. So it's not just, we have to actually look at the whole human being and the different ways in which they need to develop. And in states, so much of Zen practice is about states. It's distinguishing ever-present awareness, which is present in all states, but also emotional states, altered states, heightened states. When you have a big opening, how long does that last? So state training is a big part of that. And then also looking at types, some of us are more deeply receptive. Some people want to practice Zen like the samurais, they want to sit long hours and push through and sit through pain and the impersonal. And others of us we're gentler in our practice, and it's more receptivity and more listening and more, is there a place for different typologies that we don't all have to practice like samurai warriors? The changes, as you said, in the student-teacher relationship and hierarchy, governance structures, how these are supported. In Japan, they're all family-run temples, and they're passed from father to son. In the States, they're 501c3s with teachers who come and go. I mean, that's how we do business here. So naturally, that's going to change. The brain science has a big impact, when we look at what happens to the brain when we study.
Yeah,
So there's so many things going on.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish I had known all of this when I was starting out.
Yeah.
Instead of asking myself the question, which one's right, Christianity or Buddhism? Which school of Buddhism is it? Should I do more spirituality or psychology? It's like I had all these silos that I was like,
yeah,
trying to, run around.
Yeah, there's just no getting out of it.
There's an actual integration.
Yeah.
In a way that, what you were just describing, and I was sitting here listening to it. It just felt like you're just working with an ever-changing field.
Or just working with the wholeness of our life at this,
yes,
in this place at this time.
Yes. There's these people, and there's you, and you're moving the ball. And God bless you, if you'll pardon the expression, as a Buddhist.
I think that's great. I hope I said something worthwhile. I said a lot of things.
Yes, no, very beautiful, great transmission, really, of what you're doing. And let me just give you a plug, because
that'd be great.
A program. It's called The Future of Zen Practice: Exploring the Encounter of Tradition and Innovation. And why don't you just describe to us what it is?
Well, it's an online course. It's going to be every Saturday morning from 9 to 10:15. There's probably 50 people who already study Zen with me and who are going to be interested. We'll be looking at Ken Wilber's writing on the fourth turning, and looking at again, how the student-teacher relationship might be different. We'll be framing waking up and growing up and cleaning up. We'll be doing some shadow work. We'll also be looking a little bit at the brain science and what we've learned about the fight or flight system, and as they say, the feed and breed, and how we can cultivate more positive hormones when we're actually sitting, like dopamine and serotonin and those things. So integrating some of the science, probably some cultural studies. What do we need to do around issues of race and gender and disability and how those people show up in our sanghas? So having those kind of contemporary conversations. We may talk about social activism. You know, what does it mean to be a contemplative and an activist? That's something that engaged Buddhism has been very concerned with. So in a certain way, we're really just, with Ken's help and the integral frame, we're just allowing the encounter of Buddhism with the West. You know, we're Western practitioners, we're not Asian. And so because of that, things look and feel differently. And we just have to live it, you know?
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's what we're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is something that people will do through the Zoom platform.
Yeah, we'll be using the Zoom platform.
And it starts actually the 28th, which is, we're going to run this, we're doing this on Thursday night, we're running it Friday.
That's right.
On the 27th. It'll happen on Saturday the 28th is the first one. But if people don't make it in time, they can still join in.
Yeah, I think so. I think we usually have like a 2-week window where people can still come into the course. And they'll meet, the nice part.
Programs. Yeah,
they're going to meet, you know, 40 or 50 other pretty awesome, interesting integralists.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is there some way, so is there a virtual community or sangha, or is there some feel of that with this?
Yeah, absolutely. We have online sitting periods, so people can sit at 3 different times a day. You can get on the course early and sit for about a half an hour before we start. Then we usually do some small group work in the course. Sometimes we sit together online. So people get a lot of satisfaction out of being able to join from the convenience of their own home and then sit with people who are engaging some of these same questions, maybe practicing in a little bit more of a progressive or more innovative way, not quite as traditional and rigorous as in the past, a different sensibility.
Well, when we talk about the future of Zen practice, I'm reading it again. This is part of it right here. I mean, that we would be doing this virtually. Yeah, absolutely. People all over the world, all the needles in the haystack.
Yeah, it's great.
Find each other and work together.
Yeah, at my last retreat, we had a person from Israel. We had a person from Afghanistan. We had people from the Netherlands and from Denmark. We had people from Colombia, from Brazil, from Mexico City. There's a Japanese woman who belongs. So it's really awesome. It's an international integral scene.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for doing it.
And, thanks for having me.
And for sharing your thoughts on the future of this, as we're really just inventing as we go along here. And it's so fruitful. And when we look at what we're doing now versus what we were doing 20 years ago and 40 years ago, I mean, it's astonishing progress. It's amazing. And people are still receiving the, just the basic sense of opening up and belonging to the world, to the universe. So that's really what it's all about. Yes, indeed. So thank you, Jeff. Thank you again, Diane Musho Hamilton. Thank you, dear. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. All right. Wonderful. Bye, everybody.